All right, so good morning. My name is Michael Williams, and I am the Safety and Loss Control Consultant for Relation. And I appreciate everybody joining us this morning. We're just trying to reach out to our customers and provide some relevant information for now and for when business starts to ramp back up again, hopefully sooner rather than later. So today's topic is going to be it's Work Comp 101. So we're going to go through a couple different topics within that, and it's going to be, let me get my screen started here. We're going to have some reporting a claim to your carrier. We're going to go through some incident investigation, and then last we have some information for injury reporting with your OSHA log, and I also have a very good, it's a PDF that goes along with that. So this meeting is being recorded, and if you'd like a copy of it and a copy of the slideshow and the handout towards the end, I ask you to get in touch with your producer, and they can send you a copy of those. And also, I'll give you my information and contact information at the end, and you can reach out to me as well for that information. So let's go ahead and get started. So injury reporting. Reporting a claim to your carrier. Now, this is, some carriers have different timelines for when they want their injuries reported. So claims should be submitted as soon as possible to ensure that your injured worker gets the correct treatment that they need, to make sure that you are directing their care, you're getting them taken care of at the place that you want them to be treated. You should also have your NC Form 19 completed, and that gives a lot of the information that the adjuster will need to complete and start to get that claim processed. So some of the information that you're going to want for that is just background information for the employee, specific incident details, if there's any witness statements. Typically, if it's a lost time claim, the employment files, so their average weekly wage, different things like that. And then also if there's any video or picture evidence that you feel is relevant for that claim, submit that as well. If you have any questions about the claim, if you think that might not have happened during work time, or it could have been something that happened in their past employment, when you're reporting that claim, if you have that information, it's best to bring that up then, or when that information comes available to you. If you hear, through some other employees that the injured employee was saying he was hurt over the weekend, or different things like that, you want to bring that up as soon as that comes to light to you, so that the insurance carrier, if they need to provide any type of surveillance, they can do that. So that's very important to bring that up as soon as possible. So, like I said, a lot of the carriers will have certain requirements. Some are 24 hours, some might be 2 days, but you want to get that claim submitted as soon as you know that employee has had an injury that happened during work. All right, so the meat of the presentation is going to be in accident investigations. So why are accident investigations important? So just for determining the cause or the root cause, that is the most important reason to conduct an accident investigation. We want to prevent future accidents from happening. So during an investigation, you may find shortcomings or system failures that you didn't know were there, and it's a good time to have those corrected. Also, you may have to fulfill legal requirements, determine the cost of the incident, whether it's just the injured employee or if there's equipment that's damaged. You also want to determine compliance with applicable regulations such as OSHA, EPA, possibly even law enforcement, and you want to gather the relevant information for the work comp claim. All right, so an incident versus an accident. I like to use the word incident because an incident is an occurrence, condition, or situation arising in the course of work that resulted or could have resulted in injuries, illnesses, damages to property or equipment, and also fatalities. An accident covers basically the same scope, but when you use the word accident, it has a connotation to it and implies that an event was related to fate, chance, or luck. So when you're determining the root cause, most events are found to be predictable and could have been prevented if the correct actions were taken beforehand. So I like to use the word incident instead of accident. They kind of go hand in hand, but accident just has it just kind of has an aura around it that it might have been, something that couldn't have been prevented. So there's 4 steps in the investigation process. The first is you need to preserve and document the scene. The second, you want to collect the information. The third is determine the root cause. And the fourth, you want to implement a corrective action so that that same thing doesn't happen again. So preserve and documenting the scene. A lot of times this may not be necessary or it may not be possible for an incident. You want to show that you care about the incidents that happen in your workplace. So if you take the time to stop production, whether it be for 10 minutes or for an hour, it sends a strong message to all of your employees that you do take incidents seriously. Documenting the relevant information. Are there witnesses? Is there any camera footage from your surveillance cameras that's available that could help determine exactly what happened? And it does give you a really good picture of, the sequence of events. You also want to start making a list of the tools or equipment used. Were any of them faulty? Was the equipment in proper working condition? The environmental conditions is also something very good to document. Was it, if this was outside, was it raining? Was it muddy? If it was inside, was there spills all over the floor? So you want to have that information and you want to document it. And one of the most important things for documenting the scene is taking photos. So it's after the fact. You want to take photos of either the damaged equipment or where the employee fell, the things that are laying on the floor, because those pictures do tell a lot to the investigative team that's doing this, and it will preserve the scene for you so that you can go back, because memories do tend to fade pretty fast. Collecting information. If you have witnesses, those statements should be recorded as soon as possible. Memories and accounts of what can happen, they might fade quickly, or they can be influenced just with talking with other employees. So you also want to determine witnesses beyond the eyewitness. It's very good to talk with someone who does the same job, might be in another area, but they will give you a good account of what should be happening. And also, the first person on the scene of the incident is a good witness, even though they're not an eyewitness, but they can tell you exactly what they came upon when they showed up to the scene. So when you're interviewing a witness, some of the best practices to keep in mind are you want to state the purpose of the interview, that the interview is to find the facts. You're not necessarily looking for faults. You want to ask a witness to recount events in the order that they happen. You always want to ask open-ended questions. You want to avoid yes and no questions. You also don't want to lead the witness into a direction that you want it to go. You want to make sure that the statements are coming from their point of view. And if there's any clarifying questions that are needed, go ahead and ask those, because now is the time to get all of that information documented. Consider also collecting some of the following information: maintenance records for equipment and machinery, your company's policies and procedures, training documentation. Was the employee properly trained? If so, you want to have that documented, even if it's just toolbox talks. You want to have all of that documentation available to show that, yes, this employee has been trained, they signed off that they have been through the training, and it's just good documentation to have. Equipment manuals are also good to have to make sure that the operators are, running the equipment the way it's supposed to be. And there could be other documentation that could be needed. And as the investigation goes on, those kind of pop up as you might need this, you might need that. So there's all kinds of documents that you want to start collecting at the time. All right, so the third step is determining the root cause. So a root cause analysis allows an employer to go beyond the minimum investigation required. Conducting a root cause analysis will allow the company to discover underlying or systemic causes of the incident. Root causes are related to underlying issues. So you want to drill down to what exactly happened, not necessarily was it an unsafe act, but you want to see possibly why that unsafe act had occurred. The easy route when conducting investigation is to determine the immediate cause. So the immediate cause might be the employee slipped on something because they were being careless, but that is not the actual root cause. That is only a symptom of the incident, and these are direct or obvious causes of the incident. So it's the first thing that is available to you that's not necessarily going to be the root cause. That's going to be a symptom. So like I said, the root cause does not always focus on behaviors. If we only determine the unsafe acts and behaviors, then the investigation will only lead to human errors as the cause of the incident. So what may appear as a straightforward incident, it might have more than one single cause. So for example, an investigation that determines a worker being careless is a single cause. It fails to answer questions about the events such as, was the worker distracted? Well, you have to ask why they were distracted. Was a safe operating procedure being followed? If it was not, then why? Were safety devices or PPE being used? If they were, then you can check that off as yes, but if not, why weren't they being used? Was the worker trained or qualified? If the answer is no, then you're wanting to ask the why question. So when these questions can be answered, a sound solution to eliminate future incidents can be proposed. So I'm going to go through kind of an example of when you're drilling down to the root cause, and one of the easiest processes to use is called branching. It's going to answer the whys, but it's also going to ask you to determine the whys. So for our example, a person slips on oil on the floor. You ask why. First, oil was spilled on the floor, and the second is that person stepped in the oil. Those are pretty simple. The next is, so the oil was spilled on the floor. Why was it spilled? A machine was being serviced and oil was spilled. The other part here is a person walked through that area. Well, why did that person walk through that area, and why was the machine serviced, or why did the oil spill when the machine was being serviced? So when the machine was being serviced and oil spilled, the spill was not prevented, and secondly, the oil spill had not been cleaned up. The person was walking through that area, the person that fell, and it's simply because that person worked in that department. So when you're looking at the root cause, there's two in this situation. A spill was not prevented, and the oil spill had not been cleaned up. So the person who fell, they worked in that department. They could have probably been more aware, but after we drill down to the root cause, the fall was not necessarily an unsafe act or human error. It was simply because that person worked in that area. So we want to look at the reasons why things are happening. So the next step is to recommend attainable specific recommendations or corrections for these things. When you're implementing corrections, some key points are they need to be specific, constructive, and address the root cause of the incident. Any recommendations or corrections that are made, they need to eliminate or reduce hazards or hazardous conditions or unsafe work practices immediately. So if there's something these are minor incidents where you can immediately recommend something that's going to eliminate all of the unsafe work practices or hazards. You also can recommend engineering controls, administrative controls, or PPE, and this follows the hierarchy of controls. You don't always want to recommend PPE as the first resort. That's supposed to be reserved as the last resort. You want to try to engineer out the hazard. If that can't be done, use administrative controls, which is like job rotation, sharing the hazard so that not one person is receiving 100% of the exposure. You want to develop an action plan and set some deadlines. So you don't want to make recommendations without any type of deadline. You need to have some deadlines that are attainable so that you have some goals to meet. Once you have all this set up, you want to monitor the implementation of the corrective actions and ensure they're being utilized properly. We can all make hundreds of recommendations, even set up deadlines, but if they're not being done correctly, then our workers are still facing some hazardous conditions where they could have an injury or an incident. All right, so the next topic we're going to talk about is OSHA injury reporting. All right, first off, let's kind of talk about what an OSHA injury or illness is, what it actually is. So an injury or illness is considered work-related if an event or exposure in the work environment caused or contributed to the condition or significantly aggravated a pre-existing condition. So work-related injury and illness is presumed when they are a result from events or exposures arising in the workplace. Critical reporting deadlines for OSHA. The first one is a fatality. So if you have a fatality on your work site, those must be reported to OSHA within 8 hours. That is very, very important. There's a couple other categories here that need to be reported within 24 hours to OSHA. These are inpatient hospitalization of one or more employee. So one distinction here is if an employee has to spend the whole night in the ER having tests done, x-rays, whatever it may be, that is not considered an inpatient hospitalization. They must be admitted as a patient for this to be reportable within 24 hours. A loss of eye and an amputation also need to be reported within 24 hours to OSHA. All right, so which work-related injuries and illnesses should you record? The list is, it might seem a little bit long, but obviously a death, a loss of consciousness, if there are missed days away from work, or if there's restricted work activity, or if you have to transfer an employee to another job duty because of that injury. Oops. Also, medical treatment beyond first aid, and we're going to talk about that next. Also, if a physician or licensed healthcare professional diagnoses an employee with any of the following because of their work, which cancer, chronic irreversible diseases, fractured or cracked bones, or a punctured eardrum. So in this category, you might be thinking if somebody is diagnosed with silicosis, or if they're hearing loss because of a sudden loud sound, or if it's hearing loss over time, those also have to be reported on your OSHA 300 log. So this is a big list, and we won't go through every single one, but a lot of questions are, what is considered first aid? So anything that is goes beyond first aid needs to be reported to OSHA. But if you are using a non-prescription medication at a non-prescription prescription strength, that is not an OSHA recordable. So if your employee is given a prescription as a doctor, they fill it and they take it, you're going to need to record that on your OSHA log. But if they instead go by their own Tylenol and they take it at the recommended dose on that over-the-counter medicine, it will not be an OSHA recordable. So administering tetanus shots, that's first aid. If you're using any type of butterflies, Band-Aids, steri strips, that is considered first aid. Hot cold therapy. If you're using an eye patch, temporary immobilization devices while transporting an accident victim. A lot of times these are precautionary things. Just because they're transported on a backboard or they have a sling does not necessarily mean that you have to record that as an OSHA recordable. All right, so I'm going to flip over here to our OSHA injury advisory demo, and this is a very good resource, and it goes through questions that you can ask yourself, and it will tell you immediately if your incident is an OSHA recordable. So we'll go ahead and start, and we'll say the scenario as somebody had a pretty bad cut and they're going to the doctor to get some stitches. So you hit start. And the first question is the affected person on your company or organization's payroll? You know that they are, so we're yes. Was the incident or injury work-related? They were working on a construction site, so yes, it was. Did the injury or illness involve a fatality? No. Did the incident or injury cause the employee to have days away from work? No. Did the incident or injury cause the employee to perform restricted work or transfer to another job? No. And did the incident or injury cause the employee to receive medical treatment beyond first aid? So the cut needed more than butterflies or steri strips. They had to get stitches, so it did go beyond first aid. And immediately it will tell you that OSHA requires this incident to be recorded. A couple other things on this, and I'll kind of scroll back up to the top. It will go through a lot of questions, and if your injury or your employee's injury is not supposed to be a OSHA recordable, it will tell you no. But a lot of these injuries, there might be some gray area, and if you need to contact your producer or myself, we can help you out with that to make sure that you're in compliance with OSHA regulations. All right, so to wrap things up, it's always better to have as much information as possible when you're reporting claims. If you don't have all the information and your internal investigation hasn't been completed and you know that somebody's injured, it's still important to try to get that reported as soon as possible, because we want to avoid claims from becoming lost time claims when at all possible. Incident investigations are conducted to prevent future accidents from happening. They're very important. They can be very thorough for bigger accidents, but when there's something that's smaller that happens that might be, considered minor, it's still good to do one, because you might find some underlying behaviors or the way people are performing work that you need to correct and maybe do some retraining on. So it's always good to do some form of incident investigation, regardless of the the size of the injury, the size of the damage, because you may find some underlying facts that you didn't even know were happening. OSHA's injury and your worker compensation injury losses are not always going to match up. You will probably have more work comp entries on your loss runs than you will in your OSHA log. That's always good to keep that in mind. Just because you have a work comp injury doesn't mean that you're going to have the same number of OSHA 300 log entries. Typically you want the least amount possible on your OSHA log. So make sure that you are looking at that information closely, because just because you have a claim entered for your work comp carrier does not mean that has to go on your OSHA 300 log. So if you guys want to, I think maybe the best way to do this, I can open up the microphones and you can ask questions if you have any, or if you want to type them into the chat function, we'll be looking at that and trying to answer all those for you. And in the meantime, I'm going to put up my information. So this is my cell phone number and my email, and you can contact me for anything related to this or anything safety related that you may need, trainings, resources, different things, and I would be happy to reach out and help anybody that is looking for any type of safety and loss control resources. All right, so I've unmuted everybody. Do we have any questions?
Yes, Michael, this is Darren Poole with Evo Corporation.
Hi, Darren. How's it going?
I'm doing well. I appreciate your presentation. I had a question for you. I understand the reporting within 8 hours or 24 hours to OSHA that's now required when it's the type of injuries that you indicated, death or inpatient, for example. I also learned that there's been some changes in the OSHA injury tracking application, in which employers are now required to submit the information online that way as well, depending on what NAICS code or size of organization you are.
Right.
And we weren't previously required to do that, but we are now. Do you find that a lot of your clients are participating in that, or do you know, what changes there have been since it was first introduced to do the injury tracking?
So they have narrowed down, it started out where it's going to be a lot more companies having to do that online. They've really narrowed that list down to the certain codes and the size of employees. I think, if you have over 250 employees, might be regardless of your NAISC code, you have to report it. But yes, if you're required to report that electronically, your company is going to be big enough, or you're in the correct hazard classification to do that. I've actually, 2 companies I've worked with, there were some questions. They were very close to, or very similar to the NAISC code that would require them to report it, but because they might have been one number off, they didn't have to do it electronically. So I do know that people are doing it, but it's a whole lot. There's a lot less companies having to do it than what was originally planned.
Well, I think that's interesting that you point that out, because we're a company with 50 employees and less, or less than 50. We haven't been that size in the past. We've been larger, but currently, and with the 50 and less, because of the NAICS codes, we were not reporting initially either. And part of the reason is because of the same thing you just pointed out, that our code, NAICS, and we've got several ones that apply to the type of business that we are. We're an environmental industrial contractor. And so since we have a variety of ones, you can, I guess, whichever one you designate as your primary, which is what we do, was off by maybe the last digit or so as well. But what I later learned, or I thought I interpreted from this incident tracking reporting that it's done, is that it's the first 4 numbers, and not necessarily the last 2, that help designate whether, if you're a smaller employer in a particular code area, that you have to do that. That's why I was asking, because initially I interpreted it the same way, where we weren't doing the reporting and now we are.
Okay.
But nonetheless, I just thought that was, and that's done annually, I see, as well. So, anybody that's investigates it, discovers they need to start doing that, they can do it pretty easily, because it's, if I understood correctly, you only do it annually, around the same time you generate your, your OSHA 300. So, and one other thing I was going to mention, it's not really a question as much as it was an experience, which was when you were talking about first aid, what constitutes first aid versus medical treatment. I've seen in other listings too, where, and this may just be considered obvious as a reason why it wasn't reflected, but X-rays or other types of exams, tests that are done do not constitute beyond first aid as well. And stitching, though it does, if you've got a savvy OCMED provider out there, one of the things we discovered is in small instances where stitching could have been done, they use the glue stitching instead. That still allows it to be qualified or listed as first aid too. So I just thought those were some interesting experiences that I'd had with past accidents.
That's a very good point. The first part, with any type of diagnostic testing, so X-rays and whatever they may be doing in the ER, which causes you to be there a lot longer than what you normally would be there for, that is considered first aid. And if they find that you have no fracture, or there's something that they're looking for but they can't find it, then it's not an OSHA recordable, even though they've done a lot of the diagnostic testing, which will increase the bill, but it will avoid having to add that to your OSHA log.
Right, right. Very good. I appreciate it, Michael. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Darren. Is there anybody else that has any questions?
Hey, Michael, Steve Billings. One question that I've seen is, I know that you were talking about the importance of a effective accident investigation. In your experience, who conducts these for each company, and what's the most relevant title within the organization?
So ideally, if you have a safety professional on staff, that's who you would want to conduct it. But a lot of companies do not. So you're looking for supervisors that are, working in that area, that have knowledge of those employees, that have knowledge of what's going on. A supervisor, somebody working in that capacity, even a foreman, whatever you want to classify as. But you don't want to necessarily have your just laborers doing these investigations. You want to have somebody that has some authority, that is trustworthy to do these accident investigations. So anybody in the supervisor, foreman type role. And also something that is really good for a company to have is would be a safety committee, so that you can take this investigation back to the safety committee and take your recommendations and the corrective actions, and you might develop some better recommendations or corrective actions by bringing it to a group. So it's always good if you can have that safety committee, even though you might not have a safety professional on staff. But supervisors, foremen, somebody that can be trusted, that has knowledge of what's going on, is who we want to do the accident investigation or the incident investigations. Thanks, Steve.
Great. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? Okay. So I really appreciate everybody showing up today, and we're going to do these every week. So we'll have this again next Tuesday at 11 o'clock, and hope to see everybody there next week. And if you have any other questions related to this or non-related, you've got my contact information. Don't hesitate to reach out to myself, our producers, or anybody that you work with in relations. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.